I received one text that erased me from my family in 6 seconds. They ordered me to stay home to avoid ruining my brother's future, but then his boss, a federal judge, walked into my courtroom. By Thursday, the entire city would hear the truth on the record. The most shocking part was realizing my dad was hiding me for a reason that had absolutely nothing to do with pride. My name is Judge Haley Nelson. And at 39 years old, I have learned that the only true sanctuary in this world is constructed of mahogany, marble, and federal statutes. The silence in my chambers was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized by the weight of the decisions made within these walls. Outside, the city of Seattle was likely dissolving into a gray, rainy evening, but in here, the air was conditioned to a crisp, sterile constant. I sat behind my desk, a sprawling expanse of dark wood that felt less like furniture and more like a fortification. Before me lay the case file for United States v. Halbrook. It was a monstrosity of a file, a sprawling indictment alleging corruption, money laundering, and construction contract fraud that reached into the hundreds of millions of dollars. I picked up my fountain pen, the weight of the brass familiar and grounding against my fingers. I was reviewing a motion to suppress evidence regarding a series of wiretaps authorized 3 years ago. The defense was arguing that the probable cause was stale. The prosecution was arguing that the criminal enterprise was ongoing, making the timeline irrelevant. It was the kind of intricate, dry legal puzzle that usually quieted my mind. But tonight, the words were swimming. My phone, resting face up on the edge of the blotter, buzzed. It was a single, short vibration. In the stillness of the chambers, it sounded like a warning shot. I glanced at the screen. The name displayed was Dad. My father did not text. He believed that if something was important enough to be communicated, it should be dictated to a secretary or delivered in a speech. If he was texting me on a Tuesday evening, it was because he wanted a paper trail, or because he could not bear to hear my voice. I unlocked the phone. The message was already visible, glowing white against the dark background. Don't come to the retirement party. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions. I read it once, then I read it again. I did not gasp. I did not drop my pen. My heart did not even skip a beat, which was perhaps the most damning evidence of all regarding the state of my relationship with the people who raised me. I simply stared at the words, analyzing them with the same detached scrutiny I applied to the wiretap affidavits in front of me. You appearing will cause questions. The sheer absurdity of the sentence threatened to make me laugh, but it was a coldly humorless impulse. My father was retiring after 40 years at Pemberton and Vale Ledgerworks, a forensic accounting firm where he had built a reputation as a man who could find a missing dime in a haystack of $1 billion. For months, he had been talking about this party. It was to be his coronation, and naturally, the crown jewel of the event was to be my brother, Ethan Nelson, the golden boy, the assistant United States attorney. I set the phone down and turned my chair toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but I could feel the city out there. My father was worried that my presence would embarrass Ethan in front of his boss. He was worried that having his daughter there, the daughter he told his friends did paperwork for the government, would somehow diminish the shine of his son. The federal prosecutor. The irony was so sharp, it could have cut glass. My father's text was not just an uninvitation, it was an erasure. He was editing the family narrative in real time to suit an audience he wanted to impress. He was scared that if I showed up, someone might ask me what I did for a living, and my answer would be too boring, too small, or perhaps just too confusing alongside Ethan's sparkling career. The phone buzzed again. Mom, because of your brother's image. You understand, I looked at the message. There was no, how are you? No, I'm sorry. Honey, just a demand for compliance. You understand? It was a rhetorical question. In the Nelson family, understanding was synonymous with obeying. I was expected to understand that I was the background noise, and Ethan was the melody. I was expected to understand that my role was to be invisible so that nothing distracted from the main attraction. I typed nothing. I let the screen go dark. Then, the final blow arrived. A text from Ethan himself. Ethan, sorry, just propriety. Propriety. That word hung in the air like smoke. Propriety meant conforming to accepted standards of behavior or morals. Ethan was telling me that my absence was required for the sake of decency, as if my existence was somehow improper, as if my being in the same room as a federal judge would be a breach of protocol. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have typed 1,000 things. I could have told them that I had been appointed to the federal bench 3 years ago. I could have told them that the paperwork I did involved signing warrants that took down cartels and sentencing men to life in prison. I could have told them that the federal judge they were so terrified of offending was likely a colleague I saw in the cafeteria every Wednesday. But I didn't. I had tried to explain my career to them before. Years ago, when I made partner at my firm. My father asked if I was still just filing briefs. When I was nominated for the bench, I called them, breathless with excitement. My mother had interrupted me to ask if I had seen Ethan's interview on the local news about a drug bust. When I was confirmed, they didn't come to the ceremony. They were busy with a golf tournament my father had organized. They didn't know because they didn't want to know. To them, I was Haley the helper, Haley the clerk, Haley the unremarkable, and if I told them now, via text message, they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, they would accuse me of lying to steal Ethan's thunder, so I gave them exactly what they asked for. I gave them silence. I gave them compliance. I typed 4 words. Okay, won't be there. I hit send. Then I turned the phone off. I didn't just put it on silent. I powered it down completely. I watched the manufacturer's logo fade into blackness, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. It was like closing a door on a noisy room. I swiveled my chair back to the desk. The Holbrook file was waiting. United States v. Holbrook. I opened the main binder again, flipping past the indictment to the scheduling order. My eyes scanned the dates. Evidentiary hearing, motion to dismiss, Thursday, November 14th, 9 o'clock in the morning. I ran my finger down the page. The prosecution was bringing their A-team. This was a high-profile case, the kind that made headlines. The Department of Justice was looking for a win to justify the millions of dollars spent on the investigation. My eyes landed on the name of the lead prosecutor, Ethan Nelson, Assistant United States Attorney. I stopped. I had known, of course, that the U.S. Attorney's Office was handling this. I knew Ethan worked in the white-collar crime division, but seeing his name printed there, in stark black and white, directly under the seal of the Department of Justice, brought a cold, hard clarity to the situation. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. My father wanted me to skip the party on Saturday because Ethan's boss, a federal judge, would be there. He was afraid I would ruin the image. He was afraid I wasn't good enough to breathe the same air as important people. But today was Tuesday, and on Thursday, Ethan was going to walk into courtroom 4B. He was going to walk in with his expensive suit and his polished arguments, ready to impress his supervisors and the press. He was going to stand at the prosecution table, expecting to see Judge Kavanaugh or Judge Reynolds or any of the older, gray-haired men he was used to deferring to. He had no idea. I looked at the wall clock. It was past 8 o'clock at night. The cleaning crew would be coming through soon. I needed to finish reviewing the suppression motion. I needed to be prepared, not just prepared as a judge, but prepared as a force of nature. I picked up the file again, my focus sharpening to a razor's edge. The hurt from the text messages was still there, sitting in the pit of my stomach like a stone, but I pushed it down. I compacted it. I turned it into fuel. They wanted propriety. I would give them procedure. They wanted to avoid questions. I would give them a record. They wanted to protect Ethan's future. They had forgotten that his future, at least for the duration of this trial, was currently sitting in my hands. I worked for another 3 hours. I cross-referenced citations. I made notes in the margins with my red pen, dissecting the prosecution's arguments with a critical eye. Ethan's brief was good, I had to admit that. He was a talented lawyer. He had a flair for narrative, for making the facts sing, but he was sloppy on the technicalities. He relied too much on charm and assumed the judge would connect the dots for him. Not this judge, I thought, circling a citation that led to a depublished case. This judge reads the footnotes. By the time I stood up to leave, my neck was stiff, but my mind was crystal clear. I walked to the closet in the corner of my chambers and opened the door. Hanging there, inside a protective garment bag, was my robe. It was black, heavy, and unadorned. It was not a fashion statement. It was a uniform. When I put it on, Haley Nelson, the daughter, the disappointment, the background character, ceased to exist. In her place stood the court. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was cool under my fingertips. My father had told me to stay home so I wouldn't ruin the party. He thought he could curate his life like a forensic audit, removing the liabilities and highlighting the assets. He thought he could hide me away in a drawer like a shameful receipt. I closed the closet door and grabbed my purse. I walked out of my chambers, the click of my heels echoing down the empty marble hallway of the federal courthouse. I passed the portraits of the judges who had come before me, stern men with sideburns and gavels. I belonged here. This was my house. As I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the garage, a cold, grim smile touched my lips. "Okay, Dad," I whispered to the empty car. "I won't be at the party." The doors slid shut. "But I will be at the hearing." If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist on Saturday, that was fine. I would grant them that motion. But on Thursday, I was going to be the only thing in the room that mattered. I was going to be the one person they couldn't cut out of the picture, because I was the one holding the frame. I drove home in silence, the city lights blurring past me. I didn't turn my phone back on. I didn't need to check for more messages. The docket was set. The parties had been notified. The wheels of justice were turning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just along for the ride. I was driving the bus. And come Thursday morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, the Nelson family was going to have a head-on collision with the truth. The Wednesday morning sun in Seattle did not burst through the clouds. It seeped through them, turning the sky the color of a wet sidewalk. I sat at my kitchen island, a granite slab that felt too large for one person, nursing a cup of black coffee. The house was silent. It was a silence I had purchased with a down payment and a 30-year mortgage, a silence that usually felt like a reward, but today felt like an accusation. I had not turned my phone back on. The device sat on the counter, a black monolith of dormant guilt and potential harassment. I knew what was waiting for me inside its circuits. More texts from my mother, vacillating between passive aggression and feigned helplessness. More awkward justifications from Ethan, and perhaps a follow-up from my father, ensuring his directive had been received and understood. "Stay away. You are bad for business." It was not the first time I had been edited out of the family picture, though it was certainly the most direct. Growing up, the Nelson household operated on a strict hierarchy of attention. Ethan was the centerpiece, the oil painting hanging above the mantel, vibrant and demanding of the eye. I was the beige wallpaper, necessary for the structural integrity of the room, but designed to be ignored. I remembered a barbecue we hosted when I was 25, and Ethan was 22. I had just passed the bar exam on my first attempt, scoring in the top 5% of the state. Ethan had just been accepted into law school. My father stood by the grill, flipping burgers with the air of a general commanding troops. A neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had asked what the kids were up to. "Ethan is going to be a litigator," my father had boomed, his voice carrying over the sizzling meat. "He has got the killer instinct. He is going to run the courtroom." "And Haley, Mr.?" Henderson had asked, gesturing to where I was setting out the potato salad. My father didn't even look at me. "Oh, Haley is the steady one. She is doing paperwork for the government. Compliance stuff. Very safe. Good dental." I was working as a junior associate at a prestigious firm, handling complex appellate litigation, but to him, I was merely a bureaucrat in training. I had opened my mouth to correct him, to explain that I was drafting briefs for the Ninth Circuit, but my mother had bustled past and shoved a bowl of coleslaw into my hands. "Make sure the flies do not get on this," she had whispered, "and do not interrupt your father when he is telling a story." That was the pattern. Ethan was the protagonist. I was the stagehand. Over the years, the gap had only widened. When Ethan became an assistant United States attorney, my father acted as if he had been crowned King of England. He carried Ethan's business card in his wallet. He would pull it out at restaurants and show it to the waitress. "My son," he would say. "Federal prosecutor. Watch your speeding tickets." Meanwhile, my own career trajectory was a steep, silent climb that they never bothered to track. They did not know that I had left the firm to work for the Innocence Project, exonerating 2 men on death row. They did not know that my shift to the bench was fast-tracked because of a recommendation from a retiring Supreme Court justice who had read my opinion on a tricky Fourth Amendment case. When I was nominated for the federal judgeship 3 years ago, I had called them. It was a Tuesday evening, much like yesterday. "Dad," I had said, my voice trembling with a pride I could not suppress. "The president is going to nominate me. I am going to be a federal judge." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the television blaring in the background, a baseball game. "That is nice, honey," he had said, distracted. "Hey, did you hear Ethan got a conviction on that bank robbery case it is going to be on the 6 o'clock news?" "Dad, I am talking about a lifetime appointment to the federal bench." I had tried again, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I heard you, he had snapped, impatient. "Government work, it is good stability, pension is important. Oh, wait, hold on. Ethan is on TV, I have to go." The line had gone dead. I never brought it up again. When the Senate confirmed me, I did not send them the link to C-SPAN. When I had my investiture ceremony, I invited colleagues and mentors. I told the clerk to leave the front row empty, a private monument to my reality. But I told my parents I was busy with work that week. They never asked. They never Googled me. To them, judge was a title reserved for men on television or Ethan's bosses, not for Haley, the girl who used to wear braces and read too many books. I stopped explaining not because I was ashamed, but because I was exhausted. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to scream into a void, and I had none left to spare. I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug. The cool water over my hands brought me back to the present, the retirement party. My father had been working at Pemberton and Vale Ledger Works for 40 years. It was a forensic accounting firm, the kind of place that specialized in corporate audits and financial restructuring, which was often a polite euphemism for finding ways to hide losses or sanitize profits. My father was a senior auditor there. He was proud of his tenure. He liked to say he knew where the bodies were buried, though he always laughed when he said it, as if it were a joke. For the past month, the party was all he could talk about. It was to be held at the country club. He had sent me the invitation 6 weeks ago, printed on heavy cream cardstock. But then came the text. "Skip the party." The reason gnawed at me. Your brother's boss is a federal judge, Judge Adrian Kavanaugh. I knew him well. He was the chief judge of our district, a stern, brilliant man with silver hair and a terrifying memory for precedent. He was Ethan's mentor. Yes, but he was my colleague. We sat on committee meetings together. We ate Cobb salads in the judicial dining room on Thursdays. My father thought that if I showed up, I would be an embarrassment. He thought that a paperwork girl trying to make conversation with a federal judge would look pathetic, and by extension, make Ethan look bad. He had no idea that if I walked into that room, Judge Kavanaugh would likely stand up and shake my hand before he even acknowledged my father. But there was something else. Something about the text felt desperate. You appearing will cause questions. What questions? Who is she? That is my daughter. What does she do? Why was my father so terrified of that specific line of inquiry? Was it just snobbery? Or was it something else? I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the door. I needed to get to the courthouse. I had a busy docket. But more importantly, I had the Halbrook file. The drive downtown was a blur of gray concrete and brake lights. I parked in my reserved spot in the secure garage, a spot that had my name painted on the wall. Another detail my family would never see, and took the private elevator up to my chambers. My clerks were already there. Sarah, my senior clerk, looked up as I swept in. "Good morning, Judge," she said. The prosecution filed a supplemental witness list for the Halbrook hearing late last night. I put it on your desk. Thank you, Sarah, I said, keeping my voice level. I am not taking calls this morning, unless it is the clerk of court. Take a message. I closed the door to my office and hung up my coat. I did not put on my robe yet. I sat down and pulled the heavy Halbrook binder toward me. United States v. Halbrook, the defendant, Thomas Halbrook, was a construction magnate accused of inflating costs on federal contracts, bribing inspectors, and laundering the proceeds through a complex web of shell companies. Ethan was the lead prosecutor. He was going to argue that Halbrook had created fake consulting firms to bill the government for services that were never rendered. I opened the binder to the section I had been reviewing last night. The financial exhibits. There were hundreds of pages of bank records, wire transfers, and invoices. It was a dizzying maze of numbers, but my eyes were drawn back to a specific set of transactions from 5 years ago. Halbrook Construction had paid $2 million to a firm called Summit Strategic Solutions for audit preparation and compliance review. The prosecution Ethan alleged that Summit Strategic Solutions was a sham entity, a hollow shell used to move money. But looking at the invoices, something about the formatting struck me. The font, the way the invoice number was generated, the specific legal disclaimer at the bottom of the page in 6-point type. Liability limited to the scope of the engagement letter dated per Section 4. I had seen that boilerplate language before. I had seen it on the letterhead my father used for his personal tax returns. I had seen it on the notepads he brought home from the office. Pemberton and Vail Ledger Works. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I opened my laptop and logged into the legal research database. I typed in Summit Strategic Solutions. The entity was registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a generic corporate service. But I dug deeper. I pulled the articles of incorporation. I looked for the signatories. The name on the incorporation documents was a lawyer I did not recognize. However, listed as the managing financial officer for the initial filing was a man named Arthur Vane. I stared at the screen. Arthur Vane was my father's golf partner. He was a junior partner at Pemberton and Vail. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I went back to the case file. I turned to the witness statements. There was a deposition from a low-level accountant at Halbrook Construction who had turned state's witness. Question: who advised you to restructure the debt in this manner? Answer: we brought in outside consultants. They said if we moved the debt to the subsidiary, it would not show up on the federal compliance audit. Question: which consultants? Answer: I do not remember the firm's name. It was some fancy group. They sent an old guy, real serious. Said he had been doing this for 30 years. He said he knew how to make the numbers sing. Make the numbers sing. My stomach dropped. That was my father's phrase. He said it all the time. Give me a spreadsheet, and I will make the numbers sing. I pushed the chair back from my desk. The scraping sound loud in the quiet room. My father was retiring from Pemberton and Vail after 40 years. He was desperate for me not to attend the party. He was desperate for me not to be around Judge Kavanaugh. He had told me it was about propriety. He had told me it was about Ethan's image. But what if it wasn't? What if he wasn't afraid I would embarrass Ethan? What if he was afraid that if I showed up and someone asked me what I did, and I said, I am a federal judge, the conversation would pivot. If Judge Kavanaugh knew who I was, he might mention the cases he was overseeing. He might mention the Halbrook trial. He might mention that Ethan was prosecuting it. And if my father was in the room, my father, who worked for the firm that might have helped Halbrook cook the books, he would be standing right at the intersection of a federal investigation and a family reunion. I looked at the text message in my mind's eye. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions. He wasn't protecting Ethan's promotion. He was protecting his own retirement. I looked down at the file. Ethan was prosecuting this case. Did he know? The thought paralyzed me. Ethan was ambitious. Yes. He was self-absorbed. Absolutely. But was he corrupt? Would he prosecute a case involving his own father's firm? That was impossible. If Ethan knew his father's firm was involved, he would have had to recuse himself immediately. It was a clear conflict of interest. If he stayed on the case while knowing his father was a potential witness or target, he could lose his license. He could go to jail. Ethan's text flashed in my memory. Just propriety. He didn't know. He genuinely thought this was just about social standing. He was so blinded by his own ego, so focused on impressing his boss, that he didn't see the landmine he was stepping on. But my father knew. My father knew exactly who Ethan was prosecuting, and instead of telling his son, "Hey, I might be a witness in your case," he was trying to keep the world separate. He was trying to quarantine me so the infection wouldn't spread. I stood up and walked to the window. The city looked different now. It wasn't just gray. It was hostile. I had spent my life thinking my family's exclusion of me was a result of their indifference. I thought they didn't care enough to know who I was. But now, that ignorance was weaponized. My father was banking on the fact that I was just a paperwork girl. He was counting on my irrelevance to keep his secret safe. He thought he could manage this. He thought he could keep Ethan in the dark, keep me at home, and sail into retirement while the Halbrook case wrapped up quietly. But he had made a miscalculation, a fatal one. He forgot that the paperwork girl was the one reading the file. I turned back to the desk. The Halbrook hearing was tomorrow, Thursday, 9 o'clock. I picked up the phone and dialed my clerk. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, cold, and absolute. "Draft a disclosure statement, but do not file it yet. I need to verify one more thing." "Yes. Judge, what is it?" "Get me the full list of unindicted co-conspirators from the sealed appendix of the Halbrook indictment. I want to see every entity that billed over $10,000. I hung up. My family wanted to play games with the truth. They wanted to hide behind titles and parties and social etiquette. They wanted to pretend that the past didn't matter and that the rules didn't apply to them. I looked at the empty chair where Ethan would sit tomorrow. My father had spent his life making numbers sing, but tomorrow, in my courtroom, the music was going to stop, and for the first time in the history of the Nelson family, they were going to have to listen to me. Thursday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a scalpel. The air in courtroom 4B was scrubbed and pressurized, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper. I sat on the bench, the high leather chair providing a vantage point that felt less like a seat and more like a sniper's nest. My robe was heavy on my shoulders, a black armor that erased the civilian woman who had cried in her kitchen 2 nights ago and replaced her with an instrument of the state, the bailiff. A stoic man named Miller, who had seen more drama in 20 years than any Broadway producer, stood by the door. "Docket number 24912, I said, testing the microphone. My voice boomed through the empty room, authoritative and detached. "United States versus Halbrook, status conference." I checked the time. It was 8:55 in the morning. I arranged the papers in front of me. The motion to suppress, the witness lists, the scheduling order. I knew this case better than the attorneys did. I had to. If I was going to survive what was about to happen, I needed to be flawless. At 8:58, the heavy oak doors swung open. The defense team entered first. Miranda Holt led the way. A shark in a cream-colored suit. She was sharp, aggressive, and expensive. She moved with the confidence of a woman who billed $800 an hour and rarely lost. She gave a polite nod toward the bench, not really looking at me, just acknowledging the furniture. Then came the prosecution. Ethan walked in. He looked exactly like the son my father bragged about. He was wearing a navy suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, his tie a perfect Windsor knot of crimson silk. He was laughing at something his second chair, a young woman with a nervous energy, had just whispered to him. He carried his leather briefcase with an easy swinging rhythm. He looked like he owned the building. He looked like the future of the Department of Justice. He walked past the bar, setting his briefcase on the prosecution table. He still hadn't looked up. He was too busy being charming, too busy projecting the aura of the relaxed victor. "Good morning, Ms. Holt," Ethan said, his voice carrying that practiced baritone projection. "Ready to get this on the record. Always Mr. Nelson," Holt replied dryly. The bailiff cleared his throat. "All rise." Ethan straightened his jacket. his face composing itself into a mask of serious, respectful attention. He turned toward the bench, his eyes lifting to meet the judge for the first time. "Good morning, Your Hon—" The word died in his throat. It wasn't a fade. It was a crash, the syllable simply severed. Ethan froze. His hand, which had been reaching for a pen, stopped in midair. His mouth remained slightly open, caught in the shape of a vowel he could no longer articulate. He blinked. Once, twice. I watched him. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply existed, elevated 3 feet above him, framed by the Great Seal of the United States. For a terrifying second, I saw the brother I had played tag with in the backyard. I saw the confusion of a boy who had lost his mother in a grocery store. But then I saw the man who had texted me 2 days ago, telling me I wasn't good enough to be seen in his presence. "Mr. Nelson," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of any familial warmth. "Are we ready to proceed?" Ethan looked like he had been struck by a physical blow. His eyes darted to the nameplate on the front of the bench, Honor H. Nelson, and then back to my face. The cognitive dissonance was practically vibrating off him. He was trying to reconcile the sister he ignored with the federal judge staring him down. He stammered. The smooth golden boy prosecutor was gone. In his place was a man drowning on dry land. Your Honor," Miranda Holt looked at him, frowning. She sensed the shift in the air immediately. She looked from him to me, her eyes narrowing. "Counsel," I prompted. Ethan swallowed hard. I could see his Adam's apple bob. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Yes, Your Honor. The United States is ready." "Very well," I said, turning my gaze to the papers. "We are here to set the ground rules for the evidentiary hearing and address the defense's motion regarding the scope of cross-examination." I ran the meeting with the efficiency of a machine. I addressed Miranda Holt regarding her discovery requests. I issued rulings on the admissibility of certain financial records. I set strict time limits for opening statements. Every time I spoke to Ethan, he flinched. "Mr. Nelson," I said, looking down at him, "regarding the witness list, you have listed a forensic accountant from the FBI. Can you confirm that his testimony will be limited to the flow of funds and not legal conclusions?" "Yes," Ethan said. His voice was tight, higher than usual. "Yes, Your Honor, limited to the funds." He wouldn't look me in the eye for more than a second. He kept shuffling his papers, his hands shaking slightly. He was terrified, not because I was a judge, but because I was a variable he hadn't accounted for. I was a glitch in his perfect simulation. The proceeding lasted 30 minutes. To Ethan, it probably felt like 30 years. I stripped him of his charm. I cut off his usual rhetorical flourishes. When he tried to make a speech about the gravity of the public trust, I interrupted him. "Save the opening statement for the jury. Counselor," I said. "Address the motion on the table." He shut his mouth, his face flushing a deep, humiliated red. Finally, I closed the file. "Ms. Holt, Mr. Nelson, that concludes the scheduling matters," I said. "However, I need to see lead counsel in chambers. Immediately. The rest of your teams are dismissed." Miranda Holt looked intrigued. "Of course, Your Honor." Ethan looked like he was about to be sick. I stood up, the robe billowing around me, and exited the courtroom through the door behind the bench. I walked into my chambers and sat behind my desk. I didn't wait for them. A moment later, the door opened. Miranda Holt walked in, followed by a pale Ethan. "Sit," I said. They sat. "Ms. Holt," I said, turning to the defense attorney, "I'm going to ask you to step outside for 2 minutes. I need to speak with the Assistant United States Attorney regarding a potential administrative conflict. I will call you back in shortly so we can put this on the record." Holt raised an eyebrow. She was smart. She smelled blood in the water. But she nodded. "Certainly, Judge." She walked out, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan sat in the leather chair, staring at his hands, He looked small. "Ethan," I said. He looked up. The professional mask crumbled completely. "Haley," he whispered. "What are you doing here?" "I work here," I said. "I have worked here for 3 years." "But this is federal court," he said, the stupidity of the statement hanging in the air. "I am aware of the jurisdiction," I replied. "I was appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. It was in the newspaper. Dad threw the newspaper away, I assume?" He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect gel. "I didn't know. I swear to God. Haley, I didn't know it was you. I saw Judge Nelson on the docket, and I just thought it is a common name." "You didn't know," I repeated. "You didn't know because when I told you I was being nominated, you were watching a baseball game. You didn't know because when I called to invite you to my investiture, you sent a text saying you were busy." He stopped. There was no defense. I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the desk. "We are past that. We are in a legal proceeding now, and we have a problem." I held up 2 fingers. "You have 2 choices, Mr. Nelson, and you are going to make one of them right now." Ethan straightened up, his instincts kicking in. "What choices?" "Option 1, I said. "You formally recuse yourself from this case immediately. You cite a familial conflict of interest. You hand the file to your second chair, you walk out of that door, and you do not come back until this trial is over." Ethan's eyes widened. "I can't do that." "Why not?" "This is the Holbrook case. Haley, it is a career maker. The department has poured millions into this. If I pull out 3 days before trial, it looks like incompetence. It looks like I am afraid." "And option 2, he asked, his voice desperate. "Option 2, I said, my voice hardening. "You stay. We go back into that courtroom, and we put our relationship on the record. We disclose to the defense that we are siblings, and then I treat you exactly like I treat every other lawyer who stands before me. No favors. No shortcuts. And if you screw up, I will sanction you without hesitation." Ethan stared at me. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was calculating the odds. He was weighing the embarrassment of recusal against the risk of facing me. "Judge Kavanaugh is watching this case," he said quietly. "He assigned it to me personally. If I recuse myself now, he will think I am flaky. He will think I hid this from him." "You did hide it from him," I pointed out. "I didn't know," he insisted again. "But if I quit now, my shot at the promotion is gone. The deputy chief spot opens up next month." I looked at him, even now. Facing the sister he had erased from his life, his primary concern was the promotion. He wasn't worried about the ethics. He wasn't worried about the awkwardness. He was worried about the ladder he was climbing. "So you are choosing the career," I said. "Just like always. It is not just a career, Haley. It is my life. I have worked for this." "And what do you think I have been doing?" I asked, my voice rising slightly for the first time. "While you were building your image, I was building a record. I earned this chair. Ethan, nobody gave it to me because my father knew a guy." "Look, we can make this work," Ethan said, trying to switch back to negotiator mode. "We are professionals. We disclose it. Holt won't object. She knows a new judge would delay the trial for months, and her client wants this over. We keep it formal." I studied his face. He actually believed he could manage me. He thought that because I was his quiet little sister, he could charm his way through a federal trial. "You want to keep it formal?" I asked. "Yes, absolutely, Your Honor." I stood up. "Fine, then we are done here." I walked to the door and opened it. Miranda Holt was waiting in the hallway, checking her phone. "Ms. Holt, please come back in," I said. She entered, looking between us. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. "There is a matter of disclosure," I said, remaining standing. "Mr. Nelson has informed me that he intends to remain as lead counsel. However, the record must reflect that Mr. Nelson and I are siblings." Miranda Holt's eyes went wide. Her jaw actually dropped. She looked at Ethan, then at me. A slow, predatory smile began to form on her lips. Siblings, she repeated. Well, that is fascinating. Mr. Nelson has assured me that this will not affect his ability to represent the United States, I continued, my voice made of ice, and I have assured him that it will not affect my rulings. Do you have any objection at this time? Ms. Holt. If you wish to file a motion for recusal, I will hear it. Holt looked at Ethan. She saw the sweat on his forehead. She saw the terror in his eyes. She realized that having the prosecutor's estranged sister as the judge might be the greatest gift the defense could ask for. No objection, Your Honor, she said smoothly. We trust the court's impartiality implicitly. Good, I said. Then we are adjourned until tomorrow morning. I sat back down and began reading a document, dismissing them. Ethan lingered for a second. Haley. Counsel, I snapped, not looking up. You are dismissed. He flinched as if I had slapped him. He turned and walked out. His shoulders slumped. As he reached the door, I spoke one last time. Mr. Nelson. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. He turned back. He looked exhausted. You sent a text on Tuesday, I said. You said I shouldn't come to the party because of propriety. He nodded, looking miserable. I remember. I looked him dead in the eye. You were right. Saturday is for family. Saturday is for the image you and Dad built. So on Saturday, I don't exist. I tapped the gavel lightly against the block. But Thursday is mine, and on Thursday, I am the one who signs the orders. Ethan walked out. The door clicked shut. I was alone in my chambers. My hands were shaking, just a little. I balled them into fists until the trembling stopped. I had given him an out. I had given him a chance to do the right thing, to step away and save himself. But he had chosen the spotlight. He had chosen the boss. He had no idea that by staying in this case, he hadn't just stepped into a courtroom. He had stepped into a trap, and he had locked the door behind him. The courtroom doors opened at exactly 9 o'clock, and the air inside shifted instantly from a vacuum to a pressure cooker. The United States versus Halbrook trial had officially begun, and the gallery was packed. It was not just the usual smattering of retirees and law students. Today, the wooden benches were filled with reporters, sketch artists, and well-dressed associates from every major firm in the city. The smell of expensive cologne mixed with the musty scent of old law books. The press had smelled blood in the water. Corruption cases involving federal contracts always made for good headlines, especially when the numbers reached into the hundreds of millions. I took the bench, my face composed into a mask of absolute neutrality. I did not look at the prosecution table immediately. I knew Ethan was there. I could feel his anxiety radiating across the room like a heat wave. After our confrontation in my chambers yesterday, he knew the ground beneath him was made of glass. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. I sat down, arranged my robes, and scanned the room. That was when I saw him. Sitting in the front row of the gallery, directly behind the prosecution table, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed by a tailor on Savile Row. He had silver hair swept back perfectly, and his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and terrifyingly observant. Judge Adrian Kavanaugh, the chief judge of the district, the man my brother called the boss. The man my father was so desperate to impress that he had erased his own daughter to ensure the retirement party remained pristine. Kavanaugh was not just observing. He was holding court from the cheap seats. He sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the back of Ethan's head. He looked like a king watching a knight he had trained, waiting to see if the investment would pay off. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. My father's text message echoed in my mind. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions. Well, he was here now, and I was the one holding the gavel. Good morning, I said, my voice amplified by the microphone. We are on the record in the matter of the United States versus Halbrook. We are beginning with jury selection. Mr. Nelson, is the government ready? Ethan stood up. He did not look at me. He looked at the jury box, then briefly flicked his eyes toward Judge Kavanaugh in the gallery before answering. "The government is ready, Your Honor," he said. His voice was strong, but I heard the tremor in it. He was performing for an audience of one, and that audience was sitting 10 feet behind him. The morning session was a grueling exercise in voir dire, the process of questioning potential jurors. It is a technical, often tedious dance, but it is where trials are won or lost. I ran it with ruthless efficiency. I did not let the defense attorneys grandstand, and I did not let the prosecution charm the jury with irrelevant pleasantries. "Juror number 14, I interrupted, cutting off Miranda Holt, the defense attorney, who was trying to ask a juror about their feelings on government overreach. "Ms. Holt, stick to the questionnaire. We are determining bias, not debating political philosophy." "Yes, Your Honor," Holt said, retreating. I glanced at Ethan. He was stiff. He was trying too hard to be perfect. Every time he asked a question, he used big words, complex phrasing, trying to sound like the smartest person in the room. He was trying to sound like Kavanaugh. At one point, Ethan got tangled in a complex hypothetical question about financial liability. The juror, a retired schoolteacher, looked confused. "Counsel?" I said, my voice cutting through Ethan's rambling. "Rephrase the question. Plain English, please." Ethan froze. He could feel Kavanaugh's eyes boring into his back. To be corrected by the judge in the first hour was a bad look. "My apologies, Your Honor," Ethan said, his face flushing slightly. He simplified the question, but the rhythm was broken. I watched Kavanaugh in the gallery. He didn't frown. He didn't shake his head. He just watched, his face unreadable. It was the kind of scrutiny that could peel the skin off a man. By the time I called the noon recess, the tension in the room was palpable. "Court is in recess until 1:30, I announced. "Counsel, be seated." I stood up and swept out of the courtroom, the heavy door closing behind me. Muffling the sudden roar of conversation from the gallery, I walked back to my chambers. My heart rate steady, but my mind racing. Seeing Kavanaugh there changed the stakes. He wasn't just a boss. He was a symbol. He represented the world my family worshipped and the world they insisted I didn't belong in. I sat down at my desk and pulled a sandwich out of my bag, though I had zero appetite. A knock came at the door. My clerk, Sarah, poked her head in. She looked a little flustered. "Judge," she said, "Judge Kavanaugh is here. He asked if he could have a quick word. Just a courtesy call." I stopped unwrapping my sandwich. Of course, the courtesy call. It was standard protocol for a senior judge to greet a colleague, especially when visiting their courtroom, but this wasn't standard. This was a reconnaissance mission. "Send him in," I said. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my robe. I did not take it off. I wanted the barrier. The door opened, and Judge Adrian Kavanaugh walked in, up close. He was even more imposing. He had the kind of charisma that sucked the oxygen out of the room. He smelled of peppermint and old money. "Judge Nelson," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, dry, and warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting your lunch. I wanted to pay my respects." "Not at all, Judge Kavanaugh," I said, shaking his hand. "It is an honor to have you in my courtroom. Please, sit." He took one of the guest chairs, crossing his legs elegantly. He looked around my office, his eyes taking in the diplomas on the wall, the stack of files, the organized chaos of a working judge. "You run a tight ship, Haley," he said. He used my first name. It was a power move, disguised as collegiality. "I was watching you handle the defense during voir dire. Impressive control. Miranda Holt is not easy to wrangle, but you had her on a short leash." "Thank you, Judge," I said, remaining behind my desk. "The docket is crowded. I don't have time for theatrics." "Agreed," he nodded. "Efficiency is the soul of justice." He paused, smiling a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And I must say," he continued, "it is good to see young Ethan in action. He has been with my office for 4 years now. I have been mentoring him personally. He seems very prepared, I said carefully. He is a star, Kavanaugh said, leaning back. He has the instinct, a bit green on the edges, maybe, but he has the raw material. I see a lot of myself in him at that age. He looked at me, his expression softening into something that looked like genuine fondness. I am actually attending his father's retirement party this Saturday, Kavanaugh said. Ethan speaks very highly of his father, a forensic accountant. I believe Pemberton and Vale. My stomach tightened. Yes, that is correct. I am looking forward to it, Kavanaugh said. I like to meet the families of my rising stars. It helps me understand where they come from. Character is built at the dinner table. I always say, he chuckled softly. Ethan tells me they are a very traditional family, he said. Private, keep to themselves. I respect that. Then, he asked the question. It was delivered casually, like an afterthought, a piece of small talk tossed out while checking the weather. He is an only child, isn't he? Kavanaugh asked. He has that singular focus, that drive you usually see in people who didn't have to share their parents' attention. The world stopped. The hum of the air conditioner vanished. The light from the window seemed to freeze. He is an only child, isn't he? It wasn't that Ethan had just failed to mention me. It wasn't that he had said, "Oh, I have a sister, but she is boring." He had erased me. He had looked this man in the eye, his mentor, his idol, and he had lied. He had curated a reality where I did not exist because admitting to having a sister who was just doing paperwork spoilt the perfect narrative of the solitary golden prodigy, or perhaps, more recently, he feared admitting his sister was a judge would complicate his career path. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. In the biography of Ethan Nelson that sat on Judge Kavanaugh's desk, Haley Nelson was not even a footnote. I looked at Kavanaugh. He was smiling politely, waiting for confirmation of his astute psychological observation. I could have destroyed Ethan right then. I could have said, "Actually, Judge, I am his sister, and I'm sitting right here." I could have watched Kavanaugh's face crumble in confusion. I could have watched him realize that his star was a liar, but I didn't. Not yet. Discipline is what separates a judge from a lawyer. A lawyer argues. A judge waits for the evidence to close the loop. I kept my face completely still. I forced my heartbeat to slow down. He has a sibling, I said. My voice was flat, fact-based. I did not say me. I did not say, I am his sister. I simply stated the existence of another biological entity. Kavanaugh looked surprised for a microsecond, then recovered. "Oh," he said. "I must have misunderstood. My apologies." He laughed, a dismissive little sound. "Well," he said, waving a hand, "I assume they are not in the legal profession, usually. If there are two lawyers in the family, you hear about the rivalry. If I haven't heard of them, they must be in a different line of work, something quieter. Perhaps the insult was unintentional, which made it cut deeper. If I haven't heard of them, they must not matter. It was the echo of my entire life. My father's voice, my mother's texts, and now, the highest judicial authority in my world, all confirming the same thing. Haley Nelson was invisible." "You could say that," I replied. "They work for the government." "Ah," Kavanaugh said, nodding as if that explained everything. "Civil service. Good. Steady work. Not everyone is cut out for the arena. Right?" He stood up, checking his watch. "Well, I should let you get back to it. Judge Nelson, I will let you eat your lunch in peace. I just wanted to say hello." "Thank you for stopping by," I said. I did not stand up. He walked to the door, his hand on the knob. "Keep pushing him," Kavanaugh said, glancing back at me with a conspiratorial wink. "Ethan needs a challenge. Make him earn it." "Oh, I intend to," I said. "See you around, Judge?" The door closed. I sat there for a long time. The sandwich lay untouched on the desk. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't sad. I was cold. A deep, Arctic cold that started in my marrow and radiated out to my skin. He is an only child, isn't he? My father had told me to skip the party to avoid questions. I had assumed the questions would be about my job title. I had assumed they were ashamed of my mediocrity. But it was worse. They weren't hiding my job. They were hiding me. Ethan had built a glass castle of lies to house his ego, and my existence was a stone he couldn't afford to leave lying around. I looked at the clock. 1:20, 10 minutes until I had to be back on the bench. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the corner of the room. I looked at myself. I looked at the black robe. I looked at the face that resembled Ethan's. The same eyes, the same jawline. They thought I was a detail they could edit out. They thought they were the authors of this story. I adjusted my collar. Kavanaugh was right about one thing. Ethan was about to face a challenge. I walked back to my desk and picked up the Halbrook file. I turned to the section regarding the forensic accounting consultants. If Ethan was an only child, then he had no sister to protect him. He had no sister to warn him that the ground he was standing on was mined. I picked up my gavel. It felt heavier than usual, or perhaps I was just gripping it harder. I walked out of my chambers and headed back to the courtroom. The bailiff saw me coming and opened the door. "All rise." I swept in. I saw Ethan standing at the table, looking refreshed, confident. He had probably gotten a thumbs up from Kavanaugh during the break. He probably thought he was doing great. I sat down. I looked at him. "You have no siblings." "Ethan," I thought. "Fine. Then you have no mercy." "Be seated," I said. "Call the first witness." The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of courtroom 4B, illuminating dust motes that danced in the pressurized air of the federal trial. The initial nerves of the morning had burned off, replaced by the grinding, methodical rhythm of high-stakes litigation. I was in my element, while Ethan was sweating through his expensive shirt. Performing for an audience of one in the gallery, I was operating the courtroom like a master technician. I ruled on objections before the attorneys could even finish their sentences. I managed the flow of evidence with a precision that bordered on surgical. When Miranda Holt tried to introduce a surprise character witness to rattle the prosecution, I cited the precedent that barred it without even looking up from my notes. "Motion denied, Ms. Holt," I said, my voice cutting through her theatrical sigh. "If he was not on the disclosure list by the pretrial deadline, he does not exist in this courtroom." Ethan looked relieved. He shot a glance back at Judge Kavanaugh, who was still sitting in the back row like a gargoyle in a bespoke suit. Ethan's desire for approval was so palpable it was almost pathetic. He was prosecuting a $100 million fraud case, yet he looked like a golden retriever waiting for a treat every time he successfully entered an exhibit into evidence. But while Ethan was playing to the gallery, I was playing the long game. During the mid-afternoon recess, while the jury was ushered out for a stretch break, I signaled to Sarah, my senior clerk. She approached the bench, a notepad in hand. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice low enough that the attorneys packing up their briefcases could not hear. "I need you to pull a file for me, not from the docket." "What do you need?" "Judge," she asked. "I need my own file," I said. "Go to the public archives. I want my official appointment announcement from the White House. I want the press release from the Department of Justice when I was confirmed. I want the 3 law review articles I wrote on forensic admissibility standards. And I want the program from the Judicial Conference where I was the keynote speaker last year." Sarah blinked, confused. "You want your own resume? I can just print it from your hard drive." "No," I corrected her. "I want the public record. I want the documents that prove my existence to the outside world. Print them out, timestamp them, and put them in a folder on my desk." "Okay," she said slowly. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," I said. "I just want to ensure that the file is complete." It wasn't vanity. It was evidence. My family had spent 30 years writing a fictional story where Haley Nelson was a background extra. My father was currently throwing a party based on the premise that his daughter was a shameful secret. Ethan had lied to a federal judge's face, claiming to be effectively an only child. I was done arguing with them. I was simply going to compile the receipts. If they wanted to claim I didn't exist, They would have to argue against the United States government, which had very clearly documented that I did. We reconvened at 3 o'clock. The prosecution called their third witness of the day, a mid-level accounts manager for Halbrook Construction named Gary Sedaris. He was a nervous man with a comb-over and a habit of wiping his palms on his trousers. Ethan approached the podium. He was confident again. He felt he was winning. "Mr. Sedaris," Ethan began, his voice booming, "can you tell the jury what your role was regarding the disbursement of funds to subcontractors?" "I cut the checks," Sedaris said. "Mr. Halbrook told me who to pay, and I paid them." "And did you ever recognize the names of these companies?" Ethan asked. "Most of them," Sedaris replied. "Plumbing, electrical, concrete, but there were a few that stood out." "Stood out how?" "They didn't do construction," Sedaris said. "They were consultants, strategy firms, compliance auditors." I watched Ethan nod. He was leading the witness toward the shell companies. It was a standard play. But then Sedaris said something that made my blood turn to ice water. "There was one group," Sedaris continued. "They weren't on the regular vendor list. Mr. Halbrook said they were fixers. They came in right before the federal audit started, said they were there to tidy up the narrative." "And what was the name of this firm?" Ethan asked. Sedaris squinted at the ceiling, trying to remember. "I don't recall the full name. It was a bunch of initials, P&V something, P&V Global, or P&V Solutions." Ethan didn't react. To him, it was just another shell company. "And did you issue payments to this P&V entity?" "Yes," Sedaris said. "2 payments, one for $50,000, one for $75,000, billable as litigation support and forensic review." I kept my face perfectly still, but my hand gripped the pen so hard I thought the plastic might snap. P&V, Pemberton and Vale Ledger Works, my father's firm. It couldn't be. That was insane. My father was a suburban accountant who worried about his lawn and his pension. He wasn't a fixer for federal fraud schemes, but the details were scratching at the back of my brain. Forensic review. Tidy up the narrative. Those were my father's words. That was how he described his job at the dinner table. I go in. I look at the mess. I organize it so the IRS doesn't get a headache. I looked at Ethan. He was breezing past it. He didn't care about the name of the accounting firm. He just wanted to prove the money left the account. He was so focused on the target Halbrook that he wasn't checking the ammunition he was firing. I grabbed the exhibit binder. I flipped to the tab for the payment Sedaris was referencing. There it was. Exhibit 4C, a copy of a cashed check. Pay to the order of PVL Consulting Group, LLC. The address listed on the check was a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, but the endorsement signature on the back, it was a scribble, barely legible. Most people wouldn't recognize it, but I had seen that scribble on birthday cards for 39 years. I had seen it on my report cards. I had seen it on the checks that paid for my college tuition. It looked terrifyingly like my father's initials. I looked up. The courtroom was still moving. Ethan was asking about invoices. The jury was taking notes. Judge Kavanaugh was watching with a critical eye. Nobody saw it. Nobody knew that the presiding judge had just recognized her father's handwriting on a piece of evidence in a federal criminal trial. A wave of nausea hit me. My father's text message. "Don't come to the party. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions." I had thought he was ashamed of me. I had thought he was a snob. But what if he wasn't ashamed? What if he was terrified? If I came to the party, and Judge Kavanaugh was there, and they started talking shop, and someone mentioned the Halbrook case and my father was standing there. The man who had tidied up the narrative for Halbrook. He wasn't hiding me to save Ethan's image. He was hiding me because he was afraid I would put the pieces together. He was afraid his federal judge daughter would spot the connection that his prosecutor's son was too arrogant to see. I forced myself to breathe. Do not speculate. I told myself, you are a judge. You deal in facts. The fact was, PVL Consulting was generic. The signature was messy. It could be a coincidence, but the fear in my gut said otherwise. Your Honor. Ethan's voice broke through my trance. He was looking at me. waiting. I apologize, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Please proceed. Counsel. I got through the rest of the session on autopilot. I was a machine. I sustained objections. I overruled others. I checked the clock. At 4:30, I banged the gavel. Court is adjourned until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. As the room cleared, I stayed on the bench for a moment, pretending to organize my notes. I needed to see Ethan. I needed to see if he had any idea what he was walking into. I stepped down and walked toward the door to my chambers, but I paused near the side exit where the prosecution team was packing up. The heavy velvet curtain obscured me from their view, but I could hear them clearly. Great job today, Ethan, a young female voice said. Sedaris really nailed the fraudulent intent. It was okay, Ethan's voice replied. He sounded stressed. Did you see Kavanaugh's face when I fumbled that hearsay objection? He looked like he wanted to execute me. He is just tough, the associate said. Hey, are you still nervous about him coming to your dad's thing on Saturday? There was a pause. The sound of a briefcase snapping shut. I am terrified, Ethan said. His voice dropped lower. Look, just do me a favor. If the topic of family comes up, just steer it back to work, or sports, anything but the family tree. Why? The associate asked. Is there some deep, dark secret? Ethan laughed. But it was a brittle, nervous sound. No, just complications. My sister is well. It is better if Kavanaugh doesn't know about the family dynamic. He thinks we are a certain way. I don't want to ruin the picture. Got it? The associate said. Zip it. No sister talk. Exactly, Ethan said. Let's go. I stood behind the curtain, motionless. No sister talk. He wasn't protecting me. He wasn't even protecting my father. Not really. He was protecting the picture. The glossy, high-contrast photograph of his life, where he was the solitary hero. He had no idea that the picture he was protecting might include a father who had laundered money for the defendant he was prosecuting. I walked back to my chambers. Sarah had placed the folder on my desk. I opened it. There was my life. My appointment order signed by the president. My articles on complex fraud litigation. My awards. I looked at the documents. Then I looked at the copy of Exhibit 4C that I had slipped into my robe pocket. The check to PVL Consulting. If I went to the party on Saturday, I would blow everything up. My father would panic. Ethan would melt down. But if I stayed home, the lie would continue. Ethan would charm Kavanaugh. My father would give his retirement speech, celebrating 40 years of honest work, and the fraud would remain buried. I sat down in my chair. I picked up my phone. I turned it on for the first time in 2 days. It buzzed immediately. A text from my mother. Mom. Just checking you are not coming. We told the caterer one less seat. Dad is very stressed. Please do not make this hard for him. I stared at the screen. Don't make this hard for him. They were asking me to be an accomplice to their deception. They wanted me to help them frame a reality that was false. I typed a reply. Don't worry, I won't be there. I hit send. I wasn't going to the party. I wasn't going to make a scene over appetizers. That was too small. That was petty. I looked at the Halbrook file. If my father was involved in this, if he had truly crossed the line from accountant to accomplice, then exposing him at a country club was meaningless. The truth belonged in one place. It belonged on the record. I closed the file. Saturday would be their night. They could have their champagne and their speeches. They could toast to their success and their perfect, sister-free family. But the trial resumed on Monday, and I had a feeling that by the time I was done with United States versus Halbrook, the Nelson family was going to wish they had invited me to the party, because the alternative was going to be so much worse. I picked up my pen and wrote a note on my legal pad. Subpoena the incorporation documents for PVL Consulting Group. Seal the request. My hand didn't shake. I was done being the daughter. I was the judge, and judgment was coming. Saturday night arrived with a silence so profound it felt heavy, like a woolen blanket pulled over my head. I was sitting in my living room, a glass of red wine resting on the coaster beside me. I was wearing sweatpants and an old university sweatshirt, the kind of outfit that screamed off the clock. The television was on, playing a documentary about deep-sea exploration, blue light flickering against the walls. It was the perfect picture of a woman who had nowhere to be. According to my family, I did not exist tonight. Across town, at the Rolling Hills Country Club, the chandeliers were glittering. Waiters were circulating with trays of bacon-wrapped scallops. My father was likely standing near the bar, holding a scotch, accepting handshakes and backslaps for 40 years of service to Pemberton and Vale Ledger Works. My mother would be wearing her navy silk dress, smiling that tight, practiced smile she reserved for company. Ethan would be working the room, the golden boy in the spotlight, shaking hands with partners and clients, and most importantly, fawning over Judge Adrian Kavanaugh. I took a sip of wine. It was a good vintage, dry and oaky. I had bought it for myself to celebrate my appointment to the bench 3 years ago. I had opened it tonight because it felt appropriate. I was toasting to my own invisibility. My phone sat on the coffee table, face down. I had debated turning it off again, but the judge in me needed to be reachable. Warrants did not respect weekends, and emergencies happened. For 2 hours. The phone was silent. I imagined the party was going well. They were probably serving the main course now. Roast beef and glazed carrots. My father would be preparing his speech, clearing his throat, ready to tell his sanitized version of history. Then, at 8:45, the phone vibrated. It was a short, sharp buzz against the wood of the table. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again, and again. It began to dance across the table, a frantic, mechanical seizure. I picked it up. The screen was lit up with notifications. Ethan 5 missed calls. Ethan text message. Ethan text message. Mom text message. Dad. Incoming call. I stared at the screen. My father was calling me. During his own retirement party. He should be in the middle of his glory. He should be listening to toasts. I swiped to answer. Hello. Why didn't you tell me? My father's voice was not happy. It was not apologetic. It was strangled. A mix of fury and humiliation that I had rarely heard from him. He sounded like a man who had walked out onto a stage only to realize he wasn't wearing pants. Tell you what, Dad, I asked, keeping my voice calm. I took another sip of wine. That you are the Honorable Haley Nelson, he hissed. I could hear background noise clinking silverware, the murmur of a crowd that sounded awkwardly hushed. He was whispering into the phone, likely hiding in a hallway or a bathroom. I did tell you, I said. 3 years ago, you were watching baseball. I didn't know it meant this, he snapped. I thought it was, I don't know, administrative traffic court paperwork. It is paperwork, I said, quoting his own words back to him. Safe, stable, good dental. Don't get smart with me. Haley, he growled. Do you have any idea what just happened? Do you have any idea how stupid I look right now? No, Dad, I said. I am not there. Remember, you told me not to come. Something about propriety. Judge Kavanaugh is here, he whispered, the name coming out like a curse. He humiliated me. In front of the partners. In front of the CEO. In front of everyone. What did he do? He asked where you were, my father said. And I told him you were busy with your admin job. I tried to cover for you. You tried to cover me, I asked, a dark laugh bubbling up in my throat. Or you tried to cover yourself. He pulled out his phone. Haley. He put it on the table. He showed them a website, a government website. He read your title out loud. United States District Judge. He asked me if I was senile or just uninformed. I closed my eyes. I could see it. I could see Kavanaugh's shark-like grin. He hadn't done it to be cruel to me. He had done it to test them. He had sniffed out the lie, and he had exposed it with the ruthless efficiency of a man who sentenced people for a living. I have to go, my father said, panic rising in his voice. People are staring at the door. Your mother is crying in the corner. You should have warned me. You let me walk into a trap. I didn't set the trap, Dad, I said. You built it. I just stayed home like you asked. He hung up. I looked at the phone. The call had lasted 50 seconds. I opened the text thread with Ethan. It was a stream of consciousness. Panic attack. Ethan, 8:38 p.m. Haley pickup. Ethan, 8:39 p.m. Oh my God. Ethan, 8:40 p.m. Kavanaugh just nuked us. Ethan, 8:42 p.m. He knew. He knew the whole time. Ethan, 8:45 p.m. Everyone is looking at me like I'm a liar. I sat back on the couch. The documentary was still playing a submarine descending into the crushing black of the Mariana Trench. It felt fitting. I tapped the screen and called Ethan. He picked up on the first ring. Haley. His voice was breathless. He was outside. I could hear the wind and the distant sound of traffic. He had fled the ballroom. Tell me exactly what happened, I said. From the beginning. Do not skip a word. It was the toast, Ethan said. He sounded shaken. Dad was giving his speech, talking about the firm, about loyalty, about family values. He did the whole bit about me. My son, the prosecutor. Everyone clapped. Kavanaugh was nodding, smiling. And then Dad tried to wrap it up. He said something like, I am so proud of my family, my wife, my son. He didn't mention you. He just left you out. Standard procedure, I said. Kavanaugh stood up. Ethan continued. He didn't even wait for the applause to die down. He just stood up with his glass of champagne, and he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, Bob, aren't you forgetting someone? I felt a shiver run down my spine. Kavanaugh was enjoying this. Dad tried to laugh it off, Ethan said. He said, oh, well, my daughter couldn't make it. She is very busy with her work at the court clerk's office. He actually said clerk's office. Haley, I wanted to die. Go on. Kavanaugh didn't laugh. He looked dead serious. He pulled out his phone and held it up. He said, Bob, I think you might be underestimating your own bloodline. I was checking the docket for next week, and I see Judge Haley Nelson is presiding over a major RICO case. Unless there are two Haley Nelsons, your daughter is a federal judge. Ethan took a ragged breath. The room went silent. Dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Dad turned bright red. He tried to stammer something about misunderstanding the title, but Kavanaugh wasn't done. He looked right at Dad and said, It is strange. Usually, a father knows when his daughter is appointed by the President of the United States, unless you are trying to hide her. Ouch, I whispered. It got worse, Ethan said. Dad just froze. He looked like he was having a stroke. Mom started dabbing her eyes with a napkin, and then it happened. What happened? Mr. Henderson, you know, the loud neighbor. He was sitting at table 4. He had a few drinks. He looked at me, then he looked at Kavanaugh, and he shouted out, Wait a minute. If she is the judge and Ethan is the prosecutor, isn't Ethan trying a case in front of his own sister? My hand tightened on the phone. There it was, the other shoe. What did you say? I asked. I didn't say anything, Ethan cried. I couldn't. Everyone turned and looked at me. Kavanaugh looked at me. He had this look in his eyes, Haley like he was dissecting a frog. He said, An excellent question. Perhaps Counselor Nelson would like to explain why he failed to mention this familial connection during our meetings. And I ran, Ethan admitted. I told them I had to take an urgent call from the office and I walked out. I am in the parking lot. I can't go back in there. Haley, they think I'm a fraud. They think I lied to get an advantage. You did lie, Ethan, I said cold. You lied by omission. You wanted to be the only star in the sky, so you blocked out the sun. I didn't mean for it to be like this, he pleaded. I just wanted tonight to be about Dad and me. I didn't think Kavanaugh would. Why did he do that? Why did he ambush us? Because he is a judge, I said. We don't like being lied to, and we really don't like inconsistent testimony. What do I do? Ethan asked. Haley, you have to help me. Text Mom. Tell them it is a misunderstanding. Tell them we are estranged or something. Give me an out. I lowered the phone from my ear for a moment. looking at it with a mixture of pity and disgust. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his own ego, he was asking me to grab a shovel and help him bury the truth. He wanted me to be the bad sister so he could be the good prosecutor. I brought the phone back to my ear. "No," I said. "What?" "I am not giving you an out. Ethan, I am not sending a text. I am not calling Mom to soothe her feelings. You wanted a party without me. You got it. I am sitting on my couch, drinking wine, minding my own business. This mess at the country club, that is your jurisdiction. Haley, please. Dad is going to have a heart attack. Dad is embarrassed because he got caught," I said. He realized that the daughter he treated like a shameful secret is actually the most powerful person in his world. That is not a heart attack. Ethan, that is a reality check. "Kavanaugh is going to fire me," Ethan whispered. "He might," I said. "Or he might just watch to see if you have the spine to fix it." "How do I fix it?" "You go back inside," I said. "You stand up, you apologize for the deception, you admit that your sister is Judge Nelson, and you tell them that you are proud of her." Silence on the other end. "I can't do that," he said. "It would kill Dad." "Then stay in the parking lot," I said. "But remember one thing." "What?" "You can hide in the parking lot tonight. You can hide from Dad. You can hide from the guests. But on Monday morning, the trial resumes, and you can't hide in my courtroom." I hung up. My phone buzzed again immediately. Mom. Everyone is whispering. "Mrs. Gable asked if you were in jail, and that is why we don't talk about you." Then Kavanaugh showed her the website. Now she is asking why we are terrible parents. Do something. I didn't reply. I took another sip of wine. The social humiliation was complete. The Nelson family facade had been shattered, not by a scandal, but by the simple, undeniable weight of my success. They had spent years building a glass house, and they had just thrown a stone straight through the ceiling. But as I sat there, a darker thought crept in. The guest's question, "Isn't Ethan trying a case in front of his own sister?" That wasn't just awkward, that was dangerous. Miranda Holt, the defense attorney, wasn't at the party, but news travels fast in legal circles. By tomorrow morning, someone at that party would text a friend, who would text a lawyer, who would text Holt. "Did you know the prosecutor is the judge's brother?" And Holt wouldn't care about the social embarrassment. She would care about the appeal. She would care about the mistrial. She would care about the leverage. And my father. My father had been publicly outed as a man who didn't know or pretended not to know his own daughter's profession. Why, if I was just a clerk, I was harmless? If I was a federal judge, I was a threat? Kavanaugh had exposed the lie, but he hadn't found the root of it. He thought it was just bad parenting. He didn't know about PVL Consulting. He didn't know about the check I had found in the evidence file. My father's humiliation tonight was bad, but it was just pride. What was coming next was survival. I picked up my phone one last time. I opened the text thread with Ethan. I typed a single message. "Don't try to fix the story. Just tell it right." I set the phone down. I looked at the empty wine glass. The documentary was over. The credits were rolling in silence. The party was ruined. My brother was cowering in a parking lot. My father was being looked at like a fool. I should have felt triumphant. It was the revenge fantasy I had played out in my head 1,000 times. Look at me now. Dad. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a grim sense of finality. The curtain had been pulled back. The audience had seen the actors without their makeup. And on Thursday, the play wouldn't be a family drama anymore. It would be a tragedy. And I would be the one writing the ending. Monday morning broke over Seattle with the kind of relentless, driving rain that scrubs the city clean. But inside the federal courthouse, the atmosphere was thick with dirt. I arrived at my chambers at 7:45 in the morning. Usually, the building was quiet at this hour, a sanctuary of marble and echo. But today, the security guards at the perimeter gave me strange looks. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the silence was not peaceful. It was pregnant. My clerk, Sarah, was already at her desk. She was not typing. She was staring at her computer screen, her hand covering her mouth. When she saw me, she jumped, knocking a stack of files onto the floor. "Judge," she stammered, "I didn't expect you for another 15 minutes. "Good morning, Sarah," I said, hanging my wet raincoat on the rack. "Why are you looking at me like I am a ghost?" She hesitated, then turned her monitor toward me. "It is the Legal Intelligencer blog," she said quietly, "and the City Chronicle just picked it up." I walked over and looked at the screen. The headline was in bold, black letters that seemed to scream off the digital page. "Conflict in Courtroom 4B. Prosecutor trying major fraud case before his own sister." I felt a cold sensation wash over me, but my face remained immobile. I leaned in to read the subheader. Sources confirmed that Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Nelson is the biological brother of presiding Judge Haley Nelson. The relationship was not disclosed during pretrial motions. Defense alleges covert family alliance. "It is everywhere," Sarah whispered. "My phone has been blowing up since 6 o'clock this morning. People are asking if it is true." "It is true," I said simply. "Print it out. Put it in the file." I walked into my office and closed the door. I did not sit down. I stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass. The rumors from Saturday night's party had not just leaked, they had flooded the ecosystem. The whispers at the country club had become the headlines of Monday morning. I had warned Ethan. I had told him that hiding the truth was a debt that would eventually come due with interest. At 8:15, the debt collector arrived. My internal line buzzed. It was the clerk of court. "Judge Nelson," the clerk said, his voice clipped and formal. "We just received an emergency filing in United States versus Halbrook. It is a motion to disqualify and a motion for mistrial filed by the defense. They are marking it urgent and expedited." "Send it up," I said. 3 minutes later, Sarah walked in with the document. It was still warm from the printer. I sat down and read it. Miranda Holt had not wasted time. The motion was a masterpiece of righteous indignation. She argued that the familial relationship created an appearance of bias so severe that it tainted the entire proceeding. She argued that the prosecution had intentionally concealed the relationship to gain a tactical advantage, but it was Exhibit A that made the breath catch in my throat. Attached to the motion were not legal precedents or case citations, they were screenshots. "Dad, don't come to the retirement party. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions. Mom, because of your brother's image, you understand, Ethan?" "Sorry, just propriety." I stared at the paper, the text messages, my private text messages. The digital evidence of my family's rejection had been weaponized into a legal dagger. How did Miranda Holt get these? I scanned the affidavit attached to the exhibit. Source anonymous tip, received via encrypted email. Sunday, November 12th. Someone had leaked them. Someone who had access to the conversation. It wasn't me. It certainly wasn't my parents or Ethan. They were trying to bury this. Then I remembered the party. Ethan's panic. He had shown his phone to people. No. Had someone taken screenshots from his phone while he was hiding in the parking lot? Or perhaps my father, in his flustered state, had left his phone unattended on a table. It didn't matter. The texts were here. They proved two damning things. First, that we were indeed family. Second, and far worse, that there was an active, coordinated effort to keep me away from Ethan's professional circle to avoid questions. To a conspiracy-minded defense attorney, this didn't look like family dysfunction. It looked like a cover-up. It looked like we were hiding the relationship because we were planning to rig the trial. I put the paper down. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. I pressed the intercom button. "Sarah," I said, "clear the calendar for Thursday morning. All of it. Cancel the status conference for the drug trafficking case. Move the sentencing for Mr. Lewis to next week." "Yes, Judge. What should I list instead?" "Evidentiary hearing," I said. "Motion to disqualify. United States versus Halbrook. Thursday at 10. Thursday at 9. I corrected. And notify the parties that attendance is mandatory, no telephonic appearances, and Sarah tell the court reporter I want a daily transcript. I leaned back in my chair. Thursday. My father had texted me to skip the party until court Thursday. No, that wasn't the text, but the irony was palpable. They had tried to erase me on Saturday. Now, everything my career, Ethan's career, the Holbrook case was hurtling toward a collision on Thursday morning. The rest of the morning was a blur of damage control. I had to report the motion to the Chief Judge Kavanaugh. I drafted a memo, strictly factual, attaching the motion and stating that I would be hearing the arguments on Thursday. I did not offer to recuse myself, not yet. To recuse myself now, immediately after the filing, would look like an admission of guilt. It would look like I had been caught doing something wrong. I had done nothing wrong. I had followed the rules. The burden of disclosure was on the attorneys, but the optics were terrible. Around 11 o'clock, I went down to the cafeteria to get coffee. I refused to hide in my chambers. As I stood in line, the conversation at the table behind me stopped abruptly. Two clerks from another judge's chambers looked at me, then looked away, pretending to study their salads. I paid for my coffee and walked out. As I passed the glass-walled conference room used by the U.S. Attorney's Office, I saw a scene that looked like an execution. Ethan was sitting at the head of the table. Standing over him were three people. One was the U.S. attorney for the district, one was the head of the criminal division, and the third was Judge Adrian Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh wasn't yelling. He was doing something far worse. He was speaking softly, leaning in close to Ethan's face. Ethan looked gray. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. His tie was loosened, his hair messy. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I could read the body language. Kavanaugh gestured to the room, then to the building, then pointed a finger directly at Ethan's chest. I kept walking, but my mind filled in the dialogue. You didn't just hide your family. Ethan, you hid the truth to paint a picture. And now the paint is running, and it is staining my court. When I got back to my desk, my phone rang. It was the internal line again. Judge Nelson, the voice said. It was Ethan. Mr. Nelson, I replied. My voice was ice. You are represented by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Ex parte communication is prohibited regarding the pending motion. Haley, please, he cracked. He sounded like he was crying. They are going to fire me. They are talking about an ethics violation. Kavanaugh said I compromised the integrity of the office. Mr. Nelson, I repeated, louder this time. If you continue to speak, I will have to sanction you. Do not call this number again unless it is for a procedural scheduling matter handled by my clerk. I just wanted you to know I didn't leak the texts, he sobbed. I swear, I don't know how she got them. Goodbye, counsel. I hung up. I stared at the phone. He was crumbling. He was looking for his big sister to fix it. He wanted me to recuse myself, to make the problem go away so he could salvage a shred of his career. If I recused myself, the case would be reassigned. A new judge would come in. The trial would be delayed by months. The conflict would be resolved. But if I recused myself, I would be validating Miranda Holt's narrative. I would be admitting that the appearance of bias was real. And more importantly, if I stepped down, I would lose control of the evidence. I thought about the check, PVL Consulting. If a new judge took over, they wouldn't know to look for the forensic accounting fraud. They wouldn't know that PVL stood for Pemberton and Vail Ledger Works. They would treat it as a standard financial crime. My father would slip through the cracks again. I couldn't let that happen. I picked up my pen and began to draft the order for Thursday's hearing. The court will hear arguments regarding the defense's motion to disqualify. The government shall be prepared to disclose, on the record, the timeline of its knowledge regarding the familial relationship. The court also orders the production of the original metadata for the text messages submitted as Exhibit A. To verify authenticity, I was going to drag it all into the light, the texts, the lies, the reasoning. If my father wanted to know why I couldn't come to the party, he was about to get his answer in a federal transcript. At 4 o'clock, A courier arrived with a supplemental filing from the defense. I opened it. It was a witness list for the Thursday hearing. Miranda Holt was calling 3 witnesses to testify regarding the nature of the relationship and the potential for bias. Witness 1. Ethan Nelson. Witness 2. A forensic investigator to authenticate the texts. And Witness 3. I stared at the name. Robert Nelson. My father. Miranda Holt was subpoenaing my father to testify about why he ordered a federal judge to stay away from a party to avoid questions. I leaned back, a dark realization forming in my mind. Miranda Holt was a shark. She didn't just want me off the case. Recusal was the easy win. But why call my father, why drag an accountant into a hearing about judicial bias, unless she suspected something else? Holt had the texts. Your brother's boss is a federal judge. You appearing will cause questions. She was reading between the lines. She was wondering what questions my father was so afraid of. She was wondering if the propriety excuse was a cover for something deeper. She was fishing. She was casting a line into the murky waters of the Nelson family finances, hoping to snag something that would blow the entire prosecution apart. She didn't know about the PVL check yet, but she was knocking on the door. I looked at the window. The rain had not stopped. Thursday was coming. My father was going to have to walk into my courtroom. He was going to have to sit in the witness box. Below me, he was going to have to place his hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. And for the first time in his life, he wouldn't be able to interrupt me. He wouldn't be able to tell me to be quiet because the game was on. I was the game. I signed the scheduling order. The ink was black and permanent. Sarah, I called out. Yes, Judge. File it, I said. And make sure the press has a copy. I want the gallery full on Thursday. Miranda Holt thought she was setting a trap for me. She thought she was using my family to humiliate me into resigning from the case. She was half right. She was setting a trap, but she didn't realize that I was the one waiting to spring it. I smiled. A cold, humorless expression that reflected in the darkening window. See you Thursday, Dad, I whispered. The fluorescent lights of my chambers hummed with a low, electric buzz, a sound I usually found comforting. It was the sound of order, of a system that worked even when the world outside did not. But on Tuesday night, 48 hours before the hearing that would define my career, the sound felt like a warning siren. I was alone. My clerks had gone home. The cleaning crew had passed through hours ago. On my desk sat the Halbrook file, now dissected into stacks of paper that covered every inch of mahogany. I wasn't looking for legal precedents anymore. I was looking for a ghost. After Miranda Holt filed her motion to disqualify me, citing my family connection, I knew she was fishing, but sharks do not circle unless there is blood in the water. She wasn't just capitalizing on the embarrassment of the retirement party. She sensed that the propriety excuse my father had used to keep me away was too thin. It didn't hold up to scrutiny. A father doesn't hide a federal judge daughter just because he is socially awkward. He hides her because he is afraid. I turned to the financial appendix, specifically the section on third-party vendors. I had already found the check to PVL Consulting Group. That was the loose thread. Now, I pulled hard. I cross-referenced the PVL payments with the email discovery dump the prosecution had provided months ago, terabytes of boring corporate communications that usually no one reads. I ran a search for PVL and consulting. The system churned for a moment, then spat out 17 results. Most were invoices, but one was an email chain dated 4 years ago. It was from the CFO of Halbrook Construction to an external email address, Audit Team, Lead PVL, LedgerWorks. Com. The subject line was RE Adjustments to Q4 Liability Statement. I opened the attachment linked in the metadata. It was a memo outlining how to reclassify a $2 million loss as a capital investment to avoid triggering a federal audit flag. It was a roadmap for fraud. And at the bottom of the memo, in the Reviewed By field, were the initials R. I stared at the screen. R. Robert Nelson. It wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It could have been Richard Nixon for all the metadata cared. But then I looked at the billing code associated with the email. Partner Level Review 780. My father's employee ID number at Pemberton and Vale was 780. I knew this because he used it as the passcode for his garage door opener. He used it for everything. He said it was his lucky number. I sat back, the leather of my chair groaning. The air left my lungs. The pieces slammed together with the force of a car crash. The retirement party, the text messages. You appearing will cause questions. It wasn't about social status. It wasn't about Ethan's image. It wasn't about me being boring. My father knew that Judge Adrian Kavanaugh was coming to the party. He knew Kavanaugh was the chief judge. He knew Kavanaugh liked to talk about his cases. If I had gone to that party, and Kavanaugh had introduced me as Judge Nelson, and we had started talking about the Halbrook trial, and my father was standing there. He was terrified that I would mention the forensic accounting irregularities. He was terrified that I would say, "We are seeing some strange consulting fees from a Delaware shell company." He wasn't hiding his daughter. He was hiding his accomplice. He had erased me from the family narrative not out of shame, but out of self-preservation. He needed me to be a clerk so that no one would wonder why the daughter of the accountant was presiding over the trial of the client. My phone rang. I looked at it. Mom. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked it up. Haley. Her voice was tight, high-pitched. She sounded like she was standing in a room with very little air. "Hello, Mother," I said. "Your father is not doing well," she said. "He is pacing. He won't eat. This hearing on Thursday, Haley, you have to stop it." "I am a judge." "Mother," I said, "I don't stop hearings because my father is stressed. I schedule them." "You don't understand," she whispered. "Miranda Holt, that lawyer, she sent a subpoena to the house this afternoon. For Dad." "I know," I said. "I saw the filing." "Haley, listen to me," she said, and her voice dropped to a frantic hiss. "Dad didn't do anything wrong. He just signed off on some papers that the partners gave him. It was standard procedure. The client needed the books to look a certain way for the loan. And Dad he smoothed the edges." "Smoothed the edges?" I repeated. "Is that what we are calling felony wire fraud now?" "Don't use those words," she snapped. "He was just doing his job. He has been there 40 years. If he didn't sign it, they would have fired him. He was protecting us. He was protecting his pension." "So he sacrificed my reputation to protect his pension," I said. "He didn't mean to hurt you," she sobbed. "He just needed to keep things separate. He knew if you knew you are so rigid, Haley, you see everything in black and white. He knew you wouldn't understand the gray areas of business." "The gray area," I said coldly. "Is that where you think I live? I live in the law, Mother, and the law doesn't have a gray area for cooking the books to hide $2 million. Please," she begged. "If he goes on that stand, if that lawyer asks him about the files, it will kill him. You can fix this. Recuse yourself. Step down. If you leave, the pressure goes away. Please, Haley, for the family." "I have to go," I said. I hung up before she could say anything else. My hand was shaking. He just signed what they gave him, the Nuremberg defense of the suburban accountant. I looked at my computer screen. Ethan had sent me an email. It was flagged high importance. Subject, please read. I opened it. Haley. I swear on my life I didn't know. I looked into the PVL entity after Holt filed the subpoena. I saw the connection to Dad's firm. I almost threw up in my office. If I prosecute this case, and Dad is a witness, I lose my license. I get disbarred. But if I admit I knew, I go to jail for conflict of interest. I didn't know. You have to believe me. I thought he was just a boring accountant. I didn't know he was dirty. What do we do? I stared at the words. I didn't know he was dirty. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't worried about being the star. He realized he was the fall guy. Our father had let Ethan prosecute a case that could potentially send his own father to prison, and he hadn't said a word. He had let his golden boy walk into a minefield blindfolded. That was the ultimate betrayal. My father had risked Ethan's entire future to save his own skin. I didn't reply to Ethan. I couldn't. Anything I said would be discoverable. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, but the city below was dark. I was trapped. If I stayed on the case, I would have to preside over a hearing where my father would be questioned by Miranda Holt. Holt didn't know about the specific email I had just found, not yet, but she was smart. She would ask about his firm. She would ask about his clients. She would drill down until she hit the nerve, and I would have to sit there and watch. I would have to rule on objections while my father perjured himself or incriminated himself. But if I recused myself, if I stepped down now, Miranda Holt wins. She proves that I was biased. And worse, the case gets transferred to a new judge, a judge who doesn't know the background, a judge who might let the PVL connection slide because it looks like a minor detail in a massive fraud case. My father might get away with it, and if he got away with it, he would learn nothing. He would go back to his country club, drink his scotch, and tell everyone how he survived the misunderstanding. He would continue to erase me. I turned back to the room. There was a knock on my door. It was late, past 8 o'clock. "Come in," I said. The door opened. It was Judge Kavanaugh. He wasn't wearing his robes. He was in a trench coat, holding a wet umbrella. "Burning the midnight oil. Judge Nelson," he asked. "Just reviewing the motions for Thursday," I said. Standing up, he walked into the room, dripping water onto my carpet. He looked at the stacks of paper on my desk. He looked at the Halbrook binder. "You have a difficult day ahead of you," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have had difficult days before," I replied. "Not like this," Kavanaugh said. He walked over to the bookshelf and inspected a volume of Supreme Court rulings. "The town is talking. Haley. They are saying you are going to recuse. They are saying the pressure is too much. That blood is thicker than the federal code." He turned and looked at me. His eyes were hard, flinty. "Ethan is a mess," he said. "I spoke to him. He is terrified. He thinks his life is over." "Ethan is an adult," I said. "He made his choices." "And your father?" Kavanaugh asked. "Miranda Holt is going to peel him like an onion. You know that. She smells a rat. She thinks the propriety text was a code for something else." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "If you step down," Kavanaugh said softly, "no one will blame you. You can say it is to preserve the appearance of impartiality. You can save your family the spectacle." "Is that what you would do?" I asked. Kavanaugh smiled, a thin, razor-sharp expression. "Me no. But I am a bastard. I care more about the sanctity of this building than I do about anyone's feelings." He walked closer to my desk. "But you have to decide what you are. Are you a Nelson? Or are you a judge?" He tapped his finger on the mahogany desk. "If you protect them, Haley, you validate every lie they ever told about you. You prove them right. You prove that you are just the little sister, the daughter, the girl who does paperwork. You prove that you can be controlled." He turned to leave. "But if you apply the law," he said, pausing at the door, "if you let the sword fall where it may, then you are something else entirely. You are the thing they were afraid of all along." He opened the door. "Just remember," he added, "mercy is for the sentencing phase. The trial is for the truth." The door clicked shut. I stood there for a long time. Are you a Nelson or are you a judge? My mother wanted me to save them. Ethan wanted me to save him. My father wanted me to disappear. They all wanted me to use my power to shield them from the consequences of their own actions. They wanted to corrupt the one thing that I had built for myself, my integrity. I looked at the email on my screen. Reviewed by R.N. If I buried this, I was no better than them. If I buried this, I was an accessory. I sat down. I opened a blank document. I began to type my opening statement for Thursday's hearing. I would not recuse. I would not step down. I was going to preside. I was going to let Miranda Holt ask her questions. And if she missed the mark, if she failed to ask the right question about PVL Consulting, I stopped typing. I looked at the subpoena power of the court. If Holt missed it, I wouldn't. I wasn't going to be the daughter on Thursday. I wasn't going to be the sister. I was going to be the judge. And in my courtroom, the truth was the only family I had left. I saved the document. Hearing outline, Thursday, November 16th. The file name looked innocent enough, but inside, I knew it contained the end of the Nelson family as we knew it. I turned off the lights. The office plunged into darkness. Save for the blinking green light of the server tower, I was ready. Wednesday night fell over Seattle like a heavy velvet curtain, damp and suffocating. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a silence that felt pressurized, the kind of stillness that precedes a tectonic shift. I sat in my living room, the lights dimmed, listening to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It was 9 o'clock. Tomorrow was Thursday. Tomorrow. I would walk into courtroom 4B, not just as a judge, but as the subject of a motion to disqualify. Tomorrow. My father would take the stand. Tomorrow. The intricate web of lies my family had spun for decades would be subjected to the harsh, antiseptic light of federal scrutiny. I was mentally rehearsing my opening statement when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a desperate, leaning press, followed by a frantic pounding. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. Ethan. He looked unrecognizable. The crisp, confident prosecutor who had strode into my courtroom on Monday was gone. In his place was a man in a wrinkled raincoat, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He looked like a college student who had just failed his finals, not an assistant United States attorney. I opened the door. "Haley," he breathed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He brought the smell of wet pavement and anxiety with him. "We need to talk. You have to listen to me." "I don't have to do anything. Ethan," I said, closing the door but not locking it. I folded my arms, keeping my distance. "You are an attorney in a case pending before me. You being here is highly improper." "Screw propriety," he shouted. Then his voice cracked, dropping to a whisper. "Screw it. It doesn't matter anymore. Miranda Holt is going to destroy us tomorrow. Kavanaugh is ready to hang me out to dry. I need my sister." He walked into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. I stayed standing. I watched him. A part of me, the part that remembered him as a toddler, wanted to comfort him, but that part was buried under 3 decades of neglect. "You don't have a sister. Remember," I said, my voice cool. "You have a sibling who works in administration, someone clearly too boring to mention." Ethan looked up. His face was pale, ravaged by stress. "I lied," he said. The confession hung in the air. "I know you lied, Ethan. That has been established." "No," he shook his head. "I mean, I lied about why." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling on his knees. "I told you on Monday that I didn't know you were a judge. That was a lie. I knew. I didn't blink." "Go on." "I saw the announcement in the legal journal 3 years ago," he admitted, staring at the floor. "I saw your picture. Haley Nelson appointed to the district court. I saw it. I even cut it out. Then why," I asked, "why pretend I didn't exist? Why tell Kavanaugh I was a clerk?" "Because it was my story," Ethan burst out, hitting the sofa cushion with his fist. "My whole life, Dad made me the star. Ethan the prosecutor. Ethan the hero." It was a clean, single line. If I told people my sister was a federal judge suddenly, I am not the special one anymore. Suddenly, I am just the second best lawyer in the family. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I wanted to be the only Nelson who mattered," he whispered. "So when Kavanaugh asked, I just minimized you. I told him you pushed papers. I told him you were in the background. I wanted to keep my narrative clean." I looked at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "So it wasn't about propriety," I said softly. "It wasn't about protecting the family image. It was about your ego. You erased me because you were afraid I would outshine you." Ethan didn't answer. He just looked down. His silence was the loudest confession he could have made. "You are pathetic," I said. "I know," he wept. "I know I am. But Haley, you can't let them ruin Dad. You can punish me. Report me to the bar. But Dad, he is old. He doesn't understand this world. He understands enough to hire lawyers, I said. And speaking of Dad, Ethan's phone on the coffee table began to buzz. It was a video call request. The name on the screen was Dad. Ethan looked at it, terrified. "Answer it," I commanded. Ethan reached out with a shaking hand and tapped the green button. He propped the phone up against a vase so we could both see the screen. My father's face filled the frame. He was in his study at home. The lighting was yellow and dim. He looked 10 years older than he had on Saturday. "Ethan," my father barked. "Did you get to her? Is she listening?" "I am here, Dad," I said, stepping into the frame. My father recoiled slightly, as if seeing a ghost. "Haley," he said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was desperate. "Thank God. Listen to me. You have to stop this. You have to stop this hearing tomorrow." "I can't stop a legal proceeding, Dad," I said. "And frankly, I wouldn't if I could." "You don't understand what you are doing," he shouted, his face flushing red on the small screen. "That woman, that Miranda Holt, she's going to ask questions that have nothing to do with the trial. She is going to twist things. She is going to ask why you ordered a federal judge to hide from a party," I said. "It is a relevant question regarding bias." "It was just a text," my father pleaded. "Haley, you have to recuse yourself. Tell them you are sick. Tell them you have a conflict. Just get off the bench. If you are not the judge, Holt loses her angle. She will drop the subpoena." "Is that what you think?" I asked. "You think this is about me?" I leaned closer to the phone, looking directly into the camera lens, directly into his eyes. "I know about PVL Consulting. Dad?" On the screen, my father went perfectly still. It was the reaction of a man who hears the click of a gun behind his head. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his eyes darted to the side. "I found the check," I said, my voice merciless. "Exhibit 4C in the Halbrook file, a payment to a shell company in Delaware, and I found the email. Dad, the memo regarding the reclassification of the debt, it was reviewed by RN with your employee ID number." "That was standard work," my father spluttered. "We were consultants. We advised on strategy." "You advised on fraud," I corrected. "You helped Halbrook cook the books to hide losses so they could keep bidding on government contracts. That is federal wire fraud. That is conspiracy." "It was a capital adjustment," my father yelled, losing his composure completely. "The client directed us to move the liability I just signed off on the methodology I didn't steal anything." The room went silent. Ethan stared at the phone, his mouth open in horror. He had just heard his father admit to the specific mechanism of the crime he was prosecuting. "There," I said quietly. "You just said it. The client directed us to move the liability. That is the heart of the case. Dad, you just confessed to being a co-conspirator." My father stopped breathing for a second. He realized what he had done. He realized he wasn't talking to his daughter. He was talking to a witness. "Haley," he whispered, "you wouldn't. I am your father." "You were my father on Saturday," I said. "On Saturday. I was a liability you wanted to hide. Today, I am the judge, and you just gave me testimony." "Ethan," my father screamed. "Do something. Tell her she is your sister." Ethan looked at the phone, then at me. He looked at the tears running down our father's face. Then he looked at the cold, granite resolve in my eyes. "She is not my sister right now. Dad," Ethan said, his voice hollow. "She is the court." "I am ending this call," I said. "From this moment on, do not contact me. Do not contact Ethan. If you try to reach us, I will have you detained for witness tampering. Get a criminal defense attorney. Dad, not the corporate guy you use for taxes. A real one. You are going to need him tomorrow." I reached out and tapped the red button. The screen went black. Ethan sat there, staring at the blank phone. He looked like he had been hollowed out. "He did it," Ethan whispered. "He actually did it. I have been chasing Halbrook for 2 years, and my own dad was holding the pen." "He was protecting himself," I said. "And he used you to do it. He let you prosecute this case hoping you were too focused on your own reflection to notice his handwriting in the margins. Ethan looked up at me. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow, Miranda Holt calls him to the stand, I said. She doesn't have the email yet, but she will ask about the party. She will ask about the questions he was afraid of. And you are going to sit at the prosecution table, and you are going to listen. I can't, Ethan said. I can't watch him destroy himself. You have no choice, I said. I walked over to the door and opened it, letting the cool night air rush into the stifling room. You are the lead prosecutor. If you fail to appear, I will issue a warrant for your arrest. Ethan stood up slowly. His legs looked shaky. He walked toward the door, pausing on the threshold. Haley, he said, if I go in there tomorrow and Holt asks me about the texts about what I knew, you tell the truth, I said. But if I tell the truth about the texts, I admit I hid our relationship. I admit to an ethics violation. My career is over. Your career was over the moment you decided to lie to Adrian Kavanaugh, I said. Now, the only thing you have left to save is your soul. Do not lie in my courtroom. Ethan, I am warning you. If you perjure yourself to save Dad, or to save your reputation, I will certify the transcript and send it to the Bar Association myself. I will not let you turn my court into a circus. Ethan looked at me. For the first time, he really saw me. He didn't see the little sister he ignored. He didn't see the paperwork girl. He saw a woman who possessed a strength he had never bothered to cultivate. He started to cry again, silent tears tracking through the sweat on his face. I am scared, he whispered. Good, I said. You should be. Justice is terrifying when you have been living a lie. He walked out into the night. I watched him get into his car. He sat there for a long time before starting the engine. I closed the door and locked it. I leaned against the wood, exhaling a breath I felt I had been holding for 3 days. It was done. The lines were drawn. My father had confessed to me. Ethan had crumbled. I walked back to my computer to shut it down for the night. The screen was glowing in the dark room. There was a new notification, a filing alert from the electronic court filing system. Case 24CR912. United States v. Halbrook. Filing supplemental witness list defense. My heart skipped a beat. Miranda Holt was working late, too. I clicked the link. The defense hereby notifies the court and the government of its intent to call the following additional witness for the evidentiary hearing on Thursday. I scanned past my father's name. I scanned past Ethan's name. And then I saw it. The third name. Witness Arthur Vane. Affiliation senior partner. Pemberton and Vale Ledger Works. I stared at the name. Arthur Vane. My father's golf partner. The man who was listed on the incorporation documents for PVL Consulting. The man my father trusted. Miranda Holt didn't just want to embarrass my father. She had found someone on the inside. She had flipped someone at the firm. Arthur Vane wasn't coming to defend my father. He was coming to save himself. He was coming to point the finger. A cold smile touched my lips. Miranda Holt thought she was bringing a witness to prove I was biased. She didn't realize she was bringing the one man who could prove the underlying fraud that connected everything. She was bringing the match that would burn the whole house down. I turned off the monitor. Until court Thursday, I whispered to the empty room. The waiting was over. Tomorrow, the gavel would fall. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B was not just tense, it was combustible. Every seat in the gallery was taken. The press row was overflowing, with reporters sitting on the floor in the aisles, their laptops balanced on their knees. Sketch artists were sharpening their pencils, ready to capture the fall of a dynasty. And there, in the front row, sitting with the stillness of a predator waiting for the kill, was Judge Adrian Kavanaugh. I took the bench. The bailiff called the room to order, but the silence was already absolute. I looked down at the prosecution table. Ethan sat there. He looked like a man who had walked through a hurricane. His suit was pressed, but his face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at the gallery. He didn't look at Kavanaugh. He looked at his hands, at the defense table. Miranda Holt looked electric. She sensed weakness. She sensed a mistrial. "We are on the record," I said, my voice steady, amplified through the silent room. "This is an evidentiary hearing regarding the defense's motion to disqualify based on alleged familial bias and conflict of interest." Miranda Holt stood up immediately. "Your Honor," she began, her voice ringing with theatrical outrage, "the facts are undeniable. The lead prosecutor is your brother. This relationship was concealed from the defense. We have submitted evidence text messages that show a coordinated effort by the Nelson family to hide this relationship from the public and from the court. This is not just an oversight, it is a conspiracy to shield the court from scrutiny." She pointed a finger at Ethan, then swept her hand toward me. "How can my client receive a fair trial when the judge and the prosecutor are coordinating their social calendars to avoid questions? The appearance of bias is overwhelming. You must recuse yourself, Your Honor, and frankly, this case should be dismissed with prejudice." The gallery murmured. It was a compelling argument. I let the sound settle. I did not bang the gavel. I waited until the silence returned on its own. "Ms. Holt," I said, "you argue that the text messages prove a conspiracy to coordinate the trial. I have reviewed them. They appear to prove something quite different." I picked up the file. "They prove that for many years, my family has viewed my presence as a liability to Mr. Nelson's social standing. They do not show affection or alliance. They show estrangement." I looked directly at Ethan. "Furthermore," I continued, "the record will reflect that on Monday morning, in my chambers, I offered Mr. Nelson the opportunity to recuse himself. I gave him two choices: step down or disclose. He chose to remain. That was his error in judgment, not the court's." Ethan flinched. "However," I said, turning back to Holt, "you have raised a valid point regarding the concealment, and you have submitted these text messages as evidence." I held up the screenshot. "The court is curious. Ms. Holt, these are private communications. Mr. Nelson did not provide them. I certainly did not. My parents did not." Miranda Holt stiffened. "We received them from a confidential source." "A source," I said, my voice hardening, "that you pressured." I picked up a new document from my desk, an affidavit I had received late last night from the internal security team at the courthouse, combined with the subpoena return I had ordered regarding the leak. "This court has learned that an investigator employed by your firm contacted a junior administrative assistant at Pemberton and Vale Ledger Works, my father's firm, and threatened to expose her own minor record unless she accessed my father's unlocked phone during the party." The courtroom gasped. Holt went pale. "That is a gross violation of privacy and a borderline obstruction of justice. Ms. Holt, you tried to manufacture a scandal to force a mistrial because you are losing on the merits of the fraud case." I leaned forward. "I am denying your motion to recuse. The standard for recusal requires a reasonable question of impartiality. My record shows no favor to the prosecution. In fact, I have ruled against Mr. Nelson on 3 key evidential motions this week alone." I turned my gaze to Ethan. "However, Mr. Nelson's failure to disclose this relationship to his supervisors and to the defense is a violation of professional conduct. Therefore, while I will not step down, I am referring Mr. Nelson's conduct to the Office of Professional Responsibility for a full ethics investigation. He will remain on this case under strict supervision, but his actions outside this courtroom will face judgment." Ethan nodded slowly. He knew this was the mercy kill. I had saved the case, but I had torched his reputation. He would have to rebuild from the ashes. "Now," I said, checking the docket, "you filed a supplemental witness list. Ms. Holt, you wish to call Arthur Vane." Miranda Holt looked unsure. Her recusal gambit had failed, but she still had the witness. She still thought she could prove that my father's firm created a financial conflict. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, recovering her composure. "We call Arthur Vane." The back doors opened. Arthur Vane walked in. He was a small man with nervous eyes and a suit that looked too big for him. He was a senior partner at Pemberton and Vale. My father's colleague for 20 years. He took the stand. He was sworn in. Mr. Vane, Holt said, trying to pivot. Does your firm, Pemberton and Vale, have a financial relationship with the defendant? Halbrook Construction. We have done consulting work, Vane stammered. And is Robert Nelson, the father of the judge and the prosecutor, a partner in your firm? Yes. So, if Halbrook Construction is convicted and fined, your firm loses a major client, correct? Which means the Nelson family loses money. Isn't that a conflict? It was a weak line of questioning. Financial interest of a parent is rarely enough to disqualify a federal judge unless the money is direct, but I wasn't going to let it end there. Ms. Holt? I interrupted. You are asking generalities. Let's get to specifics. I turned my chair toward the witness. Mr. Vane, I said, I am looking at Exhibit 4C, a check for $75,000 made out to PVL Consulting Group, LLC. Is that an entity controlled by your firm? Vane froze. He looked at me. Then he looked at the gallery. I followed his gaze. My father was sitting in the third row. He looked like a statue made of ash. Mr. Vane, I repeated, you are under oath. Is PVL Consulting a shell company used by Pemberton and Vale? Yes, Vane whispered. And I have here a discovery document, I continued, holding up the email printout I had found. A memo regarding the reclassification of $2 million in debt. It is signed with the initials RN and employee code 780. The room was deadly silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. Mr. Vane? I asked, my voice slicing through the air like a guillotine blade. Who is RN? Vane looked at my father. He looked at the prosecutor, Ethan. Then he looked at me. He realized there was no way out. If he lied, he went to prison for perjury. If he told the truth, he destroyed his friend. RN is Robert Nelson, Vane said. His voice was shaking. He was the lead reviewer on the Halbrook account. He signed off on the debt reclassification. Pandemonium. The reporters jumped to their feet. The gallery erupted. Miranda Holt stood there, stunned. She had brought Vane to prove a vague conflict, and instead, she had just elicited a confession that implicated the prosecutor's father in the very fraud he was prosecuting. I banged the gavel, once, hard. Order, I shouted. Order in this court. The noise subsided to a frantic buzz. I looked at Ethan. He was staring at our father. The look on his face wasn't anger anymore. It was grief. I looked at my father. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his hands, defeated. The secret he had tried to hide by erasing his daughter had been exposed by that very daughter because he had underestimated her. The record will reflect the witness's testimony, I said calmly. Mr. Nelson, as the prosecutor, you are now in possession of evidence implicating a new party in the conspiracy. I assume you know your duty. Ethan stood up. He looked at me. He took a deep breath. Yes, Your Honor, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but firm. The United States moves to sever the investigation into Pemberton and Vale, and to designate Robert Nelson as a target of the investigation. He said it. He did his job. He indicted his own father to save the integrity of the law. Motion granted, I said. I looked at Judge Kavanaugh in the front row. He wasn't smiling. He gave me a single, slow nod. It was a salute. The aftermath was swift and brutal, as justice often is. The Halbrook trial concluded 3 weeks later. Thomas Halbrook was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. My father, Robert Nelson, did not go to trial. Confronted with the testimony of Arthur Vane and the evidence I had preserved on the record, he accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud because of his age and cooperation. He received a reduced sentence, 2 years of home confinement, and the forfeiture of his entire pension. The retirement party at the country club was the last social event he ever attended. Ethan was not fired, but he was not promoted. The Office of Professional Responsibility issued him a severe reprimand for failing to disclose the family relationship. He was transferred out of the white-collar division and moved to the Civil Litigation Bureau, a less glamorous, quieter role. He lost the star status, but he kept his license, and I stayed on the bench. A month after the trial, I went to my parents' house. My father was sitting in his armchair, an electronic monitoring bracelet on his ankle. My mother was in the kitchen, making tea, moving with the quiet, shattered demeanor of a woman who had lost her social standing. I sat down across from my father. "Why did you come?" he asked. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. "To tell you that I am not angry," I said. He looked up, surprised. "You're not—" "I lost everything. Ethan lost his promotion. Because of you." "No," I said firmly. "Not because of me. Because of the truth. You spent 40 years building a lie. Dad, you tried to build a world where Ethan was the hero. You were the successful businessman, and I was the ghost. But ghosts have a way of haunting the house." I stood up. "I am going to continue being a judge," I said. "I am going to continue making headlines. And people are going to ask you about me. They are going to ask if you are related to Judge Nelson." I paused at the door. "And for the first time in your life, you are going to have to look them in the eye and say, 'Yes, she is my daughter.' Not because you are proud, but because you have no other choice." I walked out to my car. Ethan was waiting there. He looked different. The arrogance was gone. He looked tired, but he looked real. "You were right," he said, "about everything." "I usually am," I replied. "It is part of the job description." He smiled. A faint, genuine smile. "Kavanaugh told me something yesterday. He said I was lucky." "Lucky." "He said I was lucky I had a judge for a sister, because any other judge would have thrown me in jail for contempt." "He might be right," I said. I opened my car door. "See you at Christmas?" Ethan asked. It was a tentative question. I looked back at the house, then at him. "Maybe," I said. "If you are ready to introduce me correctly." "Judge Haley Nelson," he said, testing the weight of it. "Yeah, I think I can do that." I drove away. The rearview mirror showed the house shrinking in the distance, a small, quiet place that could no longer contain me. I turned onto the highway, merging into the traffic. Just another car in the flow, but steering my own course. The party was over, but my court was always in session. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and family secrets, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to me.